Hello. Happy Monday afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar with ADHD Online. My name is Lindsay Gensel. I'm the host of the podcast Refocused, which sleep is something I'm going to need once we wrap up October. If you haven't checked out the podcast Refocused yet, right now we are in the midst of sharing 31 stories in 31 days for ADHD Awareness Month. So today we published episode 24, and we're in single digits, which is kind of how I told myself to start the month. It's my marathon mentality. When the race starts, I go, okay, I just have to get to single digits. And so we're at single digits, and I hope if you have been listening that you're loving what you're hearing. If you haven't had a chance yet, you can go to adhdonline.com and find it. You can find it wherever you listen to podcasts. And what I'm very excited about is as we get out of October, we are going to be diving into some more podcast topics that are specific to ADHD. And we'll be bringing Dr. Stephen Lange back to talk more about sleep. And that's why I'm so excited to get started today on today's webinar. But before we dive into that, I do want to just introduce Stephen a little bit more. So Stephen M. Lange, PhD, is a parent, grandparent, patient who was diagnosed with ADHD and major depressive disorder. He's a graduate of the Lehigh University School Psychology program and received his PhD in psychology from Fordham University. Prior to earning his doctorate in 1996, he worked as a school psychologist in New York City and New Jersey. And then after graduation, he worked in hospitals, prisons, addiction treatment centers, and also in his private practice. He was commissioned as a commander in the U.S. Public Health Service, and he currently works part-time, is semi-retired, and provides health services surge support to the U.S. Coast Guard as a Coast Guard auxiliarist, which I had to look up how to say, and so I hope I did it right this time. Dr. Lange has published articles in peer-reviewed publications and in magazines and newspapers. And one of the publications specifically about sleep is Will I Ever Sleep, which appeared in Sober World, a magazine for people who are in addiction recovery in 2018. And so with that, I will just kind of dive right in with Dr. Lange. And thank you for joining us. I had sleep issues before I was diagnosed with ADHD. So I will try to not just ask all the questions that I want to know today, and I will give everyone else a chance to jump in as well. So that said, if there are things that you have questions about, or if you'd like to, take a moment to have Dr. Lange expand upon something a little bit more, you can leave that in the webinar chat, and we'll make sure to communicate that. So.
Okay. Thank you very much for the introduction. One thing I left out of my bio is that in 8th grade, before I was diagnosed with ADHD, my 8th grade guidance counselor, Miss Kent, told my parents and me that I would never be college material. So lesson number one about ADHD is never tell somebody what they're not going to do. So how, the way I got interested in sleep is that I was sitting around with a parent and a teacher and a 10-year-old child in a school. And the child was struggling in school, and we're all kind of trying to puzzle out what's going on. He's putting enough work in, he has skills, he has ADHD, he has learning disabilities, but he should be doing better than he is. And while we're chatting, the mom mentioned that she had just gotten a diagnosis of obstructive sleep apnea, which is a medical disorder that interferes with really pushing air in and out during sleep. And so people have these micro awakenings where they wake up from sleep, they're not even aware that they're awake. They fall back asleep, and then it just happens over and over again. So I'm looking at the mom, and she's has a very kind of round face and a lot of heaviness under her chin and her neck. And then I look at the child, and so does he. And it kind of occurred to me, well, if mom is kind of constructed that way and has obstructive sleep apnea and can't get air in and out of her chest or her throat, maybe the child does too. So I mentioned that, and the mom said she would ask the pediatrician, and pediatrician agreed that the child needed a sleep study, and the child did have obstructive sleep apnea. Now that seems to make common sense, and it doesn't seem to really require a lot of advanced thinking. But in all my graduate school, I don't think I spent 1 hour of class time learning about sleep. It was just not a topic that anybody really thought was important. But it makes sense because to teach people about that, because if you're not awake, chances are you're not doing very well, whether you're in school, at work, driving, or doing anything else that you do during the day. And in fact, people with sleep disorders, when it comes to driving, they have a lot of car accidents. They blow through stop signs. They're more inattentive than they ordinarily would be if they have ADHD. So we really need sleep. And so if we can go to slide number 3, I think would be a good place to start. So if you take a look at slide number 3, you'll see that ADHD is really related to sleep problems. 70% of people with ADHD have some type of sleep problem, and that includes problems that are more or less behavioral, those that are more or less medical, some that are neurological. And if we can skip one more to the next page. And we really need sleep. Sleep is essential to health. It conserves our energy. Our brain actually repairs itself chemically. It kind of goes through a wash cycle while we're asleep. And so do some of our other body systems. We use sleep to consolidate memory and learning. And that's important, especially for children, but for all of us. If you study and then go to sleep, you do better the next day than if you sleep, wake up and study, because we need that sleep time for our brains to kind of consolidate that. The way we sleep and the way we're awake matters. We are diurnal, meaning that we're an animal that hunts during the day and sleep at night. Bats are nocturnal, they do the opposite. Because we are diurnal, we get our best sleep when we are consistently keyed into light and darkness. We want our day to be matched up with natural cycles of light and darkness. And the reason why is the chemical that puts us to sleep is melatonin. And we create that in our bodies. Generally, we don't need to take it in the pill form. When we have high levels of melatonin, we will sleep. When we have low levels of melatonin, we'll be awake. And we have a visual system in the brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is way at the bottom of the brain. Right, if you put your tongue on the roof of your mouth, you have the roof of your mouth, and you have a piece of bone called the cribriform, and then you have some blood vessels that go around in a circle, looks like a traffic circle, and then you have brain tissue that's very old in an evolutionary sense, and that includes the suprachiasmatic nucleus. When we have light in our face and in our eyes, it lights up that suprachiasmatic nucleus and it says, suppress melatonin. It's daylight. We need to be awake. We need to be functioning. We need to be alert. And when it gets dim out and nighttime out, and we're not getting light on our face, then our suprachiasmatic nucleus starts to allow our bodies to produce melatonin. So light inhibits melatonin, darkness allows us to produce melatonin. Melatonin puts us to sleep. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Yeah. So I want you to imagine a time in, okay, before we imagine, we'll just cover this a little bit. 70% of individuals have trouble with 70% of individuals with ADHD have problems sleeping. Some people have more problems than others. If you have ADHD combined type, you're going to have more problems sleeping than most other people with ADHD. If you have inattentive type, you're more likely to have daytime drowsiness, even if you sleep well. And if we could skip to the next slide. The more diagnoses you have, the more trouble you're going to have with sleeping. So people who have a second diagnosis, like generalized anxiety disorder, or a child with oppositional defiant disorder, bipolar disorder, depression, those individuals will have more trouble sleeping than those who only have ADHD. But it also is important to realize that few people only have ADHD. ADHD is a very comorbid disorder, meaning that most people with ADHD have one or more other disorders. Okay, if we can skip next slide. Okay, medical comorbidity. There are some sleep problems like obstructive sleep apnea and RLS, which is restless leg syndrome, that are medically diagnosed, medically treated, and have to do with our physiology or our anatomy. People with obstructive sleep apnea tend to be male. They tend to be overweight. Even if they're not very overweight, they tend to be heavy right in here, like I am. And I have had obstructive sleep apnea treated by surgery. And they tend to snore, and they tend to gasp for breath during the night. Iron deficiency is related to restless leg syndrome. And this is a need to move your leg. It's a movement disorder. You feel this incredible necessity. It's more than an urge, it's a necessity to move your leg. And you move your leg, and that necessity kind of quiets down for a moment, then it comes back. It interferes with sleep a lot. It needs to be medically treated. Some people with RLS have iron deficiency, and their physicians will treat them with an iron supplement. Some people with RLS do not have iron deficiency. It's a comorbidity of ADHD, and that can be treated with medication. Alcohol, caffeine, other drugs that can be abused interfere with sleep. A lot of people have taken a drink of alcohol to go to sleep. You know, a shot of whiskey, a glass of wine. That will put you to sleep, but your sleep quality suffers, and you can wake up too early and have a rebound. Chronic use of alcohol, like an alcohol use disorder, will wreck your sleep for a very long time. Pot, weed, cannabis, a lot of people use that for sleep. It will put you to sleep, meaning it decreases sleep latency, meaning you fall asleep faster, but you'll be drowsier during the day. And then habits like electronics. Electronics before sleep are sleep killers and are to be avoided. Sometimes sleep is a family issue, and parents have a difficult time setting limits with sleep. And one of the sleep therapies for children is teaching parents how to put their kids to sleep in a way that works for them and works for the child. Not being physically active during the day is also a risk factor for sleep problems. And if we can switch to the next slide. Okay. So this slide tells you a little bit about how many people with ADHD have some of the comorbidities, the medical comorbidities. The 55% for obstructive sleep apnea. Restless leg syndrome is 44%. Periodic limb movement disorder is also a movement disorder. And this is where you're asleep and suddenly, a limb goes in an odd direction, it could be your neck, it could be an arm or a leg. That's also medical. That can also be treated medically. Neurologically based problems, night terrors, sleepwalking, sleep eating, those are very difficult to treat. And that's something that if you or your child has problems with that, then I would suggest that you talk to your child's pediatrician or your own physician. There are problems that are really specific to ADHD. Those of us who have ADHD have a hard time with self-regulation. That's all ADHD is really. It's a disorder of self-regulation. We cannot regulate our impulses. We cannot regulate our attention. We cannot inhibit distractions. And that also means that our level of arousal versus relaxation is also very difficult to regulate. So it's difficult for us to wind down at night, go to bed, relax ourselves, slow our thoughts, and kind of settle in for sleep. I have very vivid memories as a child of laying in bed, kind of tossing and turning, trying to get in the right position, trying to settle myself down. And that really took a lot of work. And I'll talk about that a little bit later too. Some insomnia vocabulary. Delayed sleep onset means trouble falling asleep. So you lay down and it takes more than 20 minutes to fall asleep. Interrupted sleep is when you wake up in the middle of the night and have trouble falling back asleep. An early morning wakening is when you wake up before your alarm. Each one of these has a little bit of a different meaning. People with early morning wakening often have depression. Interrupted sleep is often related to anxiety, where people wake up worried about something. Did I remember to do this at work? Did I turn off the stove? Did I forget to pay that bill? An excessive worry. And if we can skip to the next slide. Now I get you to imagine. Okay, so settle back and imagine life in a previous century, kind of Little House on the Prairie. You have no artificial light, no light bulbs, no electricity. So you slept during the night and you woke up at dawn. So you were already in early morning aligned with the natural cycle of day and night with light and darkness. You worked and expended physical effort and mental effort all day, except for lunch. When it was dusk, you came in, you ate dinner, and you had dim light, candlelight or lamplight or the hearth. As those burned down, you would quiet yourselves down. The family would sew or read or talk or sing or play music, and it was a very kind of settled, relaxed time. And then when all the lights were extinguished, no more embers, the candles burned out, the lamps burned out, you went to bed. How many people do you think in that kind of agricultural world in maybe the 1800s, let's say 1850, had sleep problems? I am sure that there was no insomnia. Why? Because people were aligned with the natural cycle of light and darkness. They were also working hard all day. They were expending calories, they were expending energy, they were moving their bodies, and they were using their minds. But how about us? So if we can skip to the next slide. We live in a very different world. First, we live in a 24-hour-a-day world. You can do anything you want 24 hours a day. They used to call New York City the city that never sleeps. Now none of us ever sleep. People have, there are people who literally sleep with their phones on their chest, waiting for that phone call from work. And unless you're a neurosurgeon or a trauma surgeon, I'm not sure why you would want to do that. Um, we can order food at 3 in the morning. We can go online and talk to other people at 3 in the morning. We can trade stocks at 3 in the morning. We can do our banking at 3 in the morning. So we are not aligned with the day-night cycle. Electronic communication devices help us do that. They're ever present. They're on our minds, even if we're not using them. We know where they are, if they're on our nightstand, in our pocket, wherever, and they are interrupting our thinking constantly. We work in artificial light. So while in an agricultural society in the 1850s, people had sunlight on their faces, which is what we're adapted to, what we evolved to use to keep us awake. In artificial light, we're never really in full sunlight, and we're never really in full darkness. As a result, we are in perpetual twilight, which is why in 2 in the afternoon after lunch and your circadian rhythms are kind of at a low point in general, you begin to feel tired between 2 and 4 in the afternoon. You have not had natural sunlight, and you may not have moved your body. If you have a very physical job, you are much better off than a job like mine, where I sit and I listen and I talk and I read and I write. If you're sedentary, it is very, very difficult to expend the energy and have the movement necessary to fall asleep. If you're a child, that means you need recess. If you are an adult, it means you need recess. If you eat lunch at your desk, if you don't get up and walk outside your building, you are undermining your sleep that night. Everybody needs recess. Everybody needs light on their face during the day. And everybody needs some movement during the day. At night, because we have artificial light, our light is no different than it is during the day. So unless we go to some effort to dim our lights during the evening, there's no difference for us between dusk and mid-afternoon. So we want to begin to dim our houses, our homes, our apartments as we get closer to bedtime. We also have to wind down and become less active or calm. Okay, so I go to work, I come home, I haven't seen my family all day. I haven't seen my dog or my cat all day. So now I'm really excited and we're playing and we're doing things. And when my kids were small, we were going to football practice and soccer practice. And, you know, we were getting all charged up between dinner and bedtime. And then it's harder to fall asleep. In a perfect world, between dinner and bedtime, you want to become less active, you want to become calmer. Do not use that time for conflict. Do not argue with your kids about their schoolwork between dinner and bedtime. Do not argue with your spouse or your partner between dinner and bedtime. Do all that kind of stuff when it's light out. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. How do you know if you work with people with ADHD as a counselor or a therapist or psychologist or pediatrician or family physician, whether somebody has a problem with sleep? And you could think of sleep problems as insomnia, or you could think of it as a sleep-wake disorder on a spectrum between very alert and very awake and very asleep. Well, you can have a sleep study where they hook you up to all kinds of electrodes and measure everything from your breathing to your brain waves. Not something we're going to do in a psychology office or in a school or talking as a family. There are different self-report measures, and I listed some of them here, that will measure how sleepy you are during the day and how awake you are at night, and also the habits that you have that can facilitate sleep or undermine sleep. And the habits that facilitate sleep are called sleep hygiene. You can Google some of these. Some of these are available for you to fill out online, and you can take them to your doctor or to a counselor or to a psychologist. And if you can skip to the next slide. If you look at things in terms of the order in which you want to screen for sleep problems, the first question is there a medical issue? Why do you consider that first? One is because obstructive sleep apnea is health-threatening. Many people with obstructive sleep apnea are overweight, but having obstructive sleep apnea can also cause you to gain weight. So it becomes a cycle. And gaining weight has other problems associated with it, like metabolic syndrome and diabetes and heart disease. And hypertension is something that's a risk for obstructive sleep apnea and is also worsened by obstructive sleep apnea. So I think of that as the first question. And you can use, there is a scale, paper and pencil measure that you can use, that you can find online. And it is called the Stop Bang, which is an acronym for the different things that it asks you about, where the S for stop is snoring. Do you snore? Do you gasp for air? Now, I don't know whether I snore. I'm asleep. My wife does. She knows if I snore. I know if she snores. So besides asking yourself or asking your patient about snoring, you want to get the information from other people who would be in the know. So parents, partners, whoever sleeps together. Restless leg syndrome. In kids, they usually say, I need to kick. And that's the tip off. For adults, it's kind of obvious. You have this uncomfortable sensation. You need to move your leg. You move your leg. It calms down for a second. Then you have to do it again, and it happens over and over and over again. Restless leg syndrome can happen while you are awake. I seldom get it when I sleep. I often get it riding in a car or another vehicle. And I'm not sure why that is, but not if I'm driving, but if I'm riding and I'm relaxed, and I'm also not moving, and I'm probably not getting very good circulation in my legs, that's when I get it. So you can have kids in school who are kicking their legs, and what they have is restless leg syndrome. So it can look a lot like hyperactivity, but it can be, if a child says, no, I need to kick that leg, that's a tip off there. We talked about periodic limb movement disorders. So the first is you assess for the medical, and that can be self-assessment, or that can be if you're someone who works with people with ADHD, that can be your assessment of them. Then you look for behavioral sleep problems. For children, that's often bedtime resistance, especially kids who tend to be oppositional or defiant. They tend to resist bedtime. They want to stay awake, and you get into a battle of wills. That's not all of sleep resistance. The child who doesn't want to give up their phone at bedtime and has their phone under the covers, thinking that they're fooling you, and they're not, and you argue about that. That's sleep resistance as well. And then sleep hygiene. And then you assess sleep hygiene and you make changes in sleep hygiene. And changes in sleep hygiene is the basic, fundamental core of all sleep interventions, aside from the medical. And if you can go to the next slide. Okay. So the general principles of sleep hygiene: you want to align your behaviors with natural daylight and nighttime darkness cycles. You want to exert physical and mental energy during the day. You want to limit electronics and phones close to bedtime. And if you can go to the next slide. So sleep killers and sleep facilitators. Here are the sleep facilitators. A regular bedtime and regular time to get up in the morning. This is hard. I want to sleep in on weekends. I often do sleep in on weekends. If I were having difficulty sleeping and having a bout of insomnia, I would want to discipline myself to go to bed and wake up the same time, 7 days a week. You want your sleep environment to be welcoming and calming. You do not want to have a sleep environment that's overly stimulating. You use beds for sleep and sex only. So no laptop computers in bed, no phones in bed, no doing homework in bed, no talking on the phone in bed. You know, you want to condition yourself so that your brain associates your bed with sleep and sex and nothing else. And the opposite is if you are doing things that are stimulating when you're in bed, you classically condition yourself. And classical conditioning is like the Pavlov's dogs with the bell and the food. The bell becomes associated with food. Well, the bed can become associated with all these arousing activities. And now you're wide awake and in bed. And that's not what you want. From dinner to bedtime, activities should become more and more calming. Lights should become dimmer. As we talked about before, arguing, working, paying bills, other arousing activities before dinner. Caffeine before dinner. Alcohol no later than dinner. Do not use exercise machines right before bedtime. You will be wide awake and alert. You know that idea of like a runner's high? You get a runner's high because physical activity stimulates norepinephrine, which is an antidepressant, and it is also associated with alertness. So if you exercise too close to bedtime, you will not want to go to sleep. You will want to be wide awake. Napping is a sleep killer. Falling asleep anywhere but bed is a sleep killer. You want to associate your bed with sleep, nothing else. If you're a parent, you do not want to associate bedtime or the bed or the bedroom with punishment. In my house, we had these two big green chairs, and if you had to be punished in a way that you had to go somewhere, you went to one of the green chairs and you sat there by yourself and you were miserable for 15 minutes. And then you were able to get up and go do whatever you want. But you were not sent to your bedroom as a punishment, because I didn't want my kids to associate bed with feeling bad. The same way you don't want to use staying up late as a reward. Going to sleep is a reward for me now. You know, I wanted my kids to see that the same way. I didn't want them to see staying up as a reward and going to bed as punishment. You want to establish bedtime routines. This is very big for kids. Kids are the most conservative people in the world when it comes to routines. They like routines, they like sameness. That's why your children, young children, want to read the same stories over and over and over and over again, because they're always the same. They always have the same ending. They're predictable. So predictability helps with sleep, both for children and for us. So having a bedtime routine really helps. Limiting snacks, liquids, caffeine, and sugar before bedtime. Caffeine and sugar will keep you awake. Snacks and liquids, if you drink too many liquids right before bed, you can have interrupted sleep just because you have to go to the restroom or to the bathroom. Okay, next slide. Okay, then you get into different kinds of treatment. If improving sleep hygiene does not work, there are different types of sleep treatments. Some you can do on your own, and some you need help with. The one you can do on your own is phototherapy, photo meaning light. And this is the use of light boxes. Because artificial light does not have the same spectrum as sunlight, it is inadequate to keep us awake and alert during the day. And that means that as we go to bed, we've been in constant twilight all day and all evening with our artificial light at home, and our bodies don't know what to do with ourselves. So you can buy a light box on Amazon. You can get them anywhere from about $19 to $199. You want one that says sunlight or full light, meaning it has the same spectrum of colors as sunlight. And you just use this when you wake up in the morning. You want to wake up to light. It would be ideal if you were by a window and you could open, and the shades would open when you were ready to get up. I don't think that's very practical for most people. I know there are shades that'll do that. I've never owned one. But you can use a light box in the morning. You can use a light box during the day to have it on in the background while you work, and it simulates having sunlight. There are parent-child therapies where you use applied behavior analysis, which is the use of environmental changes and reinforcement in order to teach kids and parents to have good sleep habits that help the kids sleep. Then there's CBTI, which is cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. And there's psychologists and counselors whose sole practice is sleep, and you can find them online. There's an American Academy of Sleep that will give you directions on how to find someone who does CBTI, and it focuses on behaviors and sleep hygiene, but it also associates sleep with relaxation, and they do relaxation training. And then they also work on cognitions. The biggest cognition or thought that is a sleep killer is, I will never fall asleep. So if you're laying in bed saying, I'm never going to fall asleep, I'm going to be tired in the morning, that is a sleep killer. So they work on how to teach yourself to think and talk to yourself internally in different ways. They also teach you to restrict sleep. And what sleep restriction means is, first of all, the no napping, but it also means if you are in bed and not sleeping, get out of bed. My parents always told me, just lay in bed and relax, and you will fall asleep. And they were wrong. They were right about vegetables. They were right about wearing a raincoat. They were right about all kinds of things. They were not right about this. If you are in bed and you're not falling asleep, get up, sit in a chair, do something calming and relaxing, not involving electronics. A book is good. Knitting is good. Anything which is repetitive or calming is good. Listening to music is good. And then when you can't keep your eyes open, you go back to bed. And if you, again, can't fall asleep, you get up and repeat until you do go to bed and fall asleep. And that's what you do with infants. You know, you hold an infant, you calm the infant, you put the infant down in bed, and if he pops back awake, you hold him some more. And you don't let him fall asleep on your chest, because that's where he or she will want to fall asleep all the time. And you put him back down in bed. If they pop up, you repeat, and then eventually a child falls asleep, or you do. School-based interventions. Sleep interventions do not have to be long. They don't have to be very fancy. They don't have to be very intense. There are interventions that schools have done that are as brief as 4 class periods, where all you do is give information about sleep hygiene. And this is very useful for high schoolers, because high schoolers have terrible sleep hygiene. They are bats. They are asleep during the day while you're trying to teach them, and they're up at night while you want them to go to bed. There are online formats and videos, and there are actually sleep interventions that use text reminders to cue people on sleep hygiene. And if we could skip to the next slide. And that's what I've got to offer. I hope it's been interesting. I hope it's been helpful. And if you have questions, by all means ask. And I'll see if I have an answer.
Well, I have a ton of observations and questions, but I'm going to jump into one of the questions that has been in the queue since the very beginning. And they asked it knowing that there was a chance that you might get to it, and you didn't. So I'm happy that we can follow up with it here at the end. And it's around the ideal number of hours we are supposed to sleep. So the question was, my doctor is pushing for me to try and get 8 hours of sleep. They mentioned that that lack of sleep interferes with testosterone levels. I'm normally always sleep 6 hours and feel rested and refreshed. Is the 8-hour rule of sleep that accurate? If I were to push for 8 hours of sleep, does it need to be all at once? And I guess so to start, how much sleep should we be getting? And obviously, the more sleep, the better. But how do you then balance that with if you wake up and you feel refreshed and you feel good? It's like, where do you find that balance?
Well, so I'm being invited to disagree with someone's physician. How fun. Okay, but I do have an answer. The first is 8 hours of sleep is an average. It's not a requirement. On average, an adult needs between 7 and 9 hours of sleep. Adolescents need more, children need more, infants need the most. You don't want to have fragmented sleep because napping kills nighttime sleep. So you don't want to have 6 hours of sleep and then sometime in the afternoon or evening have a nap. Because 8 hours is an average and 7 to 9 are averages, there are people who are short sleepers. Your doctor is probably a short sleeper because anybody who goes to medical school, they work double 12-hour shifts and they do all kinds of, very demanding schedules. So there are people who are short sleepers. If you are a short sleeper, you're probably not going to sleep 8 hours. How do you know if you're getting enough sleep? And the question contains the answer. Are you refreshed in the morning? And are you awake and alert during the day? If you're refreshed in the morning, good sign number one. Two is if you go through your day and you are feeling alert and alive and able to do everything you want to do during the day and not feeling drowsy and not falling asleep while you're driving or working or going to school, then you're probably getting enough sleep. So I don't know that a rigid rule that 8 hours is necessarily applicable to all people. By the same token, there are long sleepers. There are people who are adults who will not function on 7 to 9 hours. They need more. And that's just those are just individual differences. So you may be a short sleeper and 8 hours may not be realistic for you. What you might want to do as a compromise with your doctor is talk about before falling asleep, using that wind down time and having time of real relaxation. And relaxation is not leisure, it's not fun. So golf is not relaxation, golf is leisure. So having time when you're reading, when you're listening to music, I wouldn't listen to headbanging music and call that relaxation, but listening to something softer, soft classical music, soft jazz, soft rock, whatever music you like, as long as it's soft and relaxing, and having 2 hours of real relaxation before going to sleep. I think that might be something your physician might agree to and might endorse.
And I want to remind everyone, if there are questions you have, Don't worry about the time because Dr. Lange and I are actually going to record a follow-up episode on Friday. So if there are questions we don't get to today, we will get to them on Friday because there's a lot of really awesome questions coming in, which makes me so excited. So this one, and it makes total sense that this would be asked. I don't think I've ever thought about this though. The question is, are all humans meant to go to sleep at the same time? And I guess the follow-up then is, how do you know what is the appropriate bedtime for you if you're someone who has never established proper sleep hygiene?
Okay. Yeah, there are a couple different parts to that question. One is through evolution, we evolved to be nighttime sleepers, daytime, and awake during the daytime. That's why shift work is so difficult for people with, as far as sleep goes, and also why shift work has other kinds of health consequences. So we're conditioned to go to sleep when it's dark out. That's in general. Whether that's 9 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, again, is going to be an individual difference. I don't think there can be one universal rule for that. When you are drowsy and you are going to fall asleep soon after getting in bed, that's a good time to go to sleep or go to bed. Don't go to bed if you are awake and alert and lie there not sleeping and getting frustrated. That is only going to make sleep more difficult. And establishing good sleep hygiene is a set of habits. So establishing the right bedtime for you could be the first one you tackle, but it doesn't have to. It doesn't have to be either. But the right time to fall asleep is when you are drowsy and you know you're going to fall asleep soon after you lay down. If you're lying there for more than 20 or 30 minutes not sleeping, then you should not be in bed. So I hope that answers the question. I know it's not a like this is the right time answer, but it's kind of the best I can give you.
No, I think it's so complicated. And I think, the one thing that the analogy that I have been thinking through this entire webinar is how a while back, after I had been exercising regularly for like 5 years, I had this moment where I was like, I've been feeling really good lately. And then I thought of all the things that I've been doing, but never once was I like, oh, I've been exercising regularly. And it just reminds me, it's this idea of like, yeah, they said that one of the benefits of working out regularly was, feeling better. So all of these things are things that I feel like most of us have heard before. Like I have been told many times to not be on my phone in bed. I still get on my phone in bed. And so it's just, sometimes it's just having to test things out. I want to jump ahead. So I'm going to kind of go out of order here in questions, because I think that this is an important one to get to in kind of the order of what we're talking about. And this is related to melatonin, which we touched on briefly. What are your views on using melatonin, a supplement of melatonin, to help set some sort of routine?
Okay, the first thing I have to do is I have to tell you I'm not a medical doctor, I'm a psychologist. So I prescribe things like walks in the park and playing with your dog. I don't do medications or supplements. I can tell you in general terms about research. Research says that melatonin is beneficial and safe. That's not an individual recommendation for you because I'm not a physician. I think use of melatonin is far better than using sleep pharmaceuticals. And I would not be surprised if some of the sleep pharmaceuticals, the class of medications that include things like Ambien and Lunesta, some of those may be off the market in a few years. They have some very, problematic side effects. So I believe strongly in using behavioral techniques before using pharmaceuticals, and the research backs me up on that. Cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia is more effective than sleep medications. Melatonin, I would talk to your doctor about it. Uh, from a psychologist standpoint, and my understanding of the research, I don't know of any reason not to use it. But again, I would talk to a physician about that.
And I appreciate that clarification on, your role. I love that your prescription is a walk in the park, because I think sometimes, even just the reminder of, we as adults do need to get out and get exercise.
If I were running a company, which nobody will ever let me do, thank God. If I were running a company and I wanted my employees to be awake and alert in the afternoon and be as productive at 3:30 in the afternoon as they were at 9:30 in the morning, I would insist that everybody eat lunch outdoors or walk around, for 20 minutes and have adult recess. Assuming you're not in an environment where it's like Minnesota, where it's 30 below in the winter, or it's raining all the time in Seattle and you can't do that. But if adults could get sunlight and movement during the day, they would be more productive employees. And all the call centers where people are call centers have high rates of just quitting. People leaving those jobs. Give them adult recess; they might stick around longer and they might do better. And by the same token, if you were going to design buildings, we've made windows smaller so we get less sun. I went to a school that was built in the 1930s for elementary school. We had huge windows and high ceilings, and that was for ventilation because we didn't have AC, and also for sunlight. And that is far better than having these little narrow slit windows. So if adults need movement and sunlight just like kids do. And it's kind of sad that there are schools that are getting away from recess, because if you want kids to do well in the afternoon, they have to have sun and movement. And it's also part of health maintenance, controlling body weight, controlling metabolism, so we all need that.
Another question is a follow-up on the concern you have over how naps can affect sleep hygiene. Mm-hmm. What do you recommend for someone who is a shift worker or is a single parent and naps during the day? Obviously, it's not an ideal scenario, but it's what they're doing to get by. Because, we would all love to live in a world where we can get 8 hours of rested sleep. But the unfortunate reality, and it's not something that we're told when we're growing up, is that sometimes jobs and life and responsibilities don't allow for that.
Right. When it comes to children and in early childhood and infants, so let's say between ages 2 years and preschool or kindergarten, I think the rule, when the child sleeps, you sleep, makes perfect sense. If you're up during the night nursing, or if you're up during the night changing diapers, or if your child has trouble sleeping at night because they're not yet physiologically mature enough to self-regulate their sleep, and your child sleeps during the day, or your child goes to daycare, you sleep during the day. You sleep when you can. That's an absolute exception, because it's worse to be sleep deprived than to have an irregular sleep schedule. Shift work has its own problems. Again, you don't really want fragmented sleep. If you can sleep a solid length of time, and that's your sleep for the 24-hour period, that's the best. So having a routine that is shifted along the 24-hour cycle, so that you have rising, going to work, then doing your routine stuff that you have to do after work, the shopping, the banking, post office, then winding down, then going to sleep, even if it's 12 hours off from the rest of us. If you get that solid block of sleep, you're doing well. Fragmented sleep, like sleeping for 2 hours, sleeping for 4 hours, sleeping for 6 hours, that's not as ideal. Fragmented sleep, you don't get complete sleep cycles. You don't get the same kind of dreaming sleep, which is called REM sleep. And you also can kill your sleep because you're only going to sleep so many hours in a 24-hour period. So anytime you nap, you're deducting that from kind of your sleep budget. So with shift work, it's very difficult. You are not on a natural cycle that you evolved to be on as an animal, as a primate. The best I can tell you is try to get solid sleep and not fragmented sleep.
There are a few more questions that I don't think we're going to have time to get to because they seem to be ones that are pretty intense. So Dan had a question about dreams, and is actually something that I had on my sheet as well. So Dr. Lange, if it's okay with you, we'll answer that on Friday, and I can give you that ahead of time. And then there was another question about, and I think if I took notes correctly, it's about interrupted sleep. So the, waking up after 4 or 5 hours and then having trouble going back to sleep. And so that is a question that came up, and how ADHD can affect that. Also something I struggle with, and it's very frustrating. So we will answer that in Friday's follow-up. We will dive into both of those. I've saved those, and we'll get to that. And then any of the other questions that we didn't get to just here in this quick Q&A session, we will include in Friday's follow-up. I have a long list of notes that I took, that I have some follow-ups that I would love to get to. But I'm so appreciative for the webinar, Dr. Lange, because there were a lot of things that I've had difficulty with that you actually put names to, like, let me see. Oh no, did I not write it down? All right, now I'm going to have to ask for your expertise. What is the one where it's not restless leg syndrome, but you just move and
periodic
you're sleeping?
Periodic limb movement disorder.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm really good at that one.
That is a medical issue, and your doctor can treat that.
Yes, that's been something that I've dealt with my entire life, and I've never had a name for it. So for that, I am so appreciative. And as I mentioned, like I said, we are going to do a follow-up episode. I'm actually going to, in the chat right here, I'm going to include the email for the podcast. So if you get done with this and you think of something that you didn't get a chance to ask, or there's a follow-up, just shoot me an email. I will make sure that I compile a long list of all the things that we need to follow up on for Friday's conversation. But Dr. Lange, I just wanted to thank you for sharing your expertise with us. And it sounds so simple to do what the experts say, but we all know once you get into life, it is so hard to follow some of those rules. But obviously, we all know how detrimental it can be to just not have good sleep, to not feel well during the day. And I think, it's a great starting point for a lot of people. So I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you for the opportunity to speak to you all. I'm very glad to do it, and very, very grateful for the opportunity.
All right. Well, we will catch up on Friday. Thank you everyone for attending. The webinar, once it is done and uploaded, will be available for you to go back if you have any questions or you want to revisit something that Dr. Lange touched on. In the meantime, thank you all for just hanging out and joining us on this Monday, and stay tuned for more stuff. And if you haven't yet, you can check out the podcast. And like I mentioned, we'll be including a couple of episodes with Dr. Lange there in November. So thank you everyone for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.